So the Soundboks Go is Soundbox's newest ultra-portable, ultra-durable, and still super loud Bluetooth speaker that does a really good job of keeping up with his older brother, the Soundboks 3. Now, like I said in the overview, I feel that the Soundboks Go is a very neat speaker that's going to get cross-referenced with a lot of other speakers out there. But today we are going to compare the Soundboks Go to the JBL Partybox 110 and the Sony XP500. Form factor-wise, these are the most direct competitors to the Soundboks Go. However, when it comes to pricing, these speakers are in two completely different leagues. Both the Partybox 110 and Sony XP500 have a retail price of $400. Thanks to inflation, they have gotten a $50 price increase from when I initially reviewed them, and the 110 can be a little hard to find sometimes. Whereas the Soundboks Go has a retail price of $700, and if you want to add the shoulder strap, that's going to be an additional $60. Now, price-wise, I know this is not an apples-to-apples comparison, but it is form factor-wise. Nonetheless, if you want to pick any of these speakers up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch shelf down below. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great, and if you've been watching me for a while, you know I can be very particular, so I'll only set my name on something that I'm really proud of. Now first, let's talk about the design of these speakers. Now size-wise, the Go is a little smaller than the 110 and XP500. Specifically, it's not as long, but it is relatively the same height and it has the same thickness. And all of these speakers weigh in between 20 and 25 pounds. So generally speaking, all of these speakers are just as portable as one another. However, the major difference between all of these speakers is their durability. Now, both the 110 and XP500 have a mostly plastic body and metal grille on the front. Now, don't get me wrong, these speakers are very well built, but their softer plastic bodies love to collect scratches anytime you're transporting either of these two speakers, and you do run the risk of denting their fairly thin metal grille. Whereas the Soundboks Go, that's a whole other story. The Go has a mostly plastic body and front honeycomb grille. However, the plastic used on the Go is way denser than the plastic used on these other two speakers, and the Go does a phenomenal job of standing up to constant abuse. The only wear and tear that I have seen the Go collect is just some dirt that is found around its extruded rubber bumpers. So if you're looking for a portable Bluetooth speaker and you need something super rugged, then the Go is the obvious choice. And besides just being way more durable than these other two speakers, the Go is also rocking higher IP water and dust resistance certification, coming in with a rating of IP65. Whereas both the 110 and XP500 are both rocking IPX4 ratings. Basically, all of this means is that both of these speakers aren't afraid of a little water, so rain or getting splashed on isn't going to be an issue, but the Go is officially dust resistant. Now, even though the Go is technically more resistant than these other two speakers, and clearly this is a main selling point of this speaker, I would still be mindful about not getting any dust or water into the front firing exhaust ports found around the main woofer of this speaker. And the same goes for the 110 and XP500. But durability and portability aside, I also have to point out that both the Go and 110 have speaker stand mounts on the bottom, whereas the XP500 doesn't. Which is a small but still very important detail for some. And as a bonus, the Go does have a built-in loop strap, so you can always attach some things to it if you want. However, something that these two other speakers have over the Go are their built-in light features. Now, you shouldn't make your speaker purchase decision solely on the light feature, but if you were, obviously the 110 has a much better and way more dynamic looking light feature than the XP500. And if you plan on mostly using any of these box speakers mostly at home at a lower volume while you entertain guests while on your deck, or if you plan on using them in your man cave on a regular basis, then the light feature on the 110 is really going to come in handy. The light feature on the XP500 is also nice, but it just doesn't compare. But now let's talk about battery life on these speakers, because there is a lot of nuance here. Now, the Sony XP500 has an advertised battery life of 20 hours, whereas the 110 has an advertised battery life of 12 hours. But the XP500's advertised battery life of 20 hours is with it playing at 30% volume, with its light feature turned off, and with its mega bass feature turned on, which is good. However, 30% volume on this speaker is nothing. It's good for like ambience, but it's not good for actually listening to music. And in general, max volume performance on the XP500 is a problem, but we're gonna address that later. Whereas with the Partybox, its advertised battery life of 12 hours is with it playing at 20% volume, with its light feature turned off, and with its bass boost feature turned off as well. However, 20% volume on the Partybox is noticeably louder than 30% volume on the Sony XP500. And in general, the XP500 is very quiet for its size when running off of its internal battery. So for this reason, I suspect that most people are going to use the XP500 between 50 to 100% volume on a regular basis, whereas with the Partybox, 60 to 80% volume is a really good listening volume. So, real-world use with the XP500 playing at 80% volume with the LED feature turned on and with Mega Bass turned on, it's good for about 8 hours of playback time, which is fine. Whereas with the Partybox, with its volume set to 65% volume, which is just as loud as the XP500 set at 80% volume, with its light feature turned on and with its bass boost feature set to deep, it's good for about 8 hours of playback time as well. So, even though at first glance the Sony XP500 has a much longer advertised battery life than the Partybox 110, since I feel most people are going to have to use the XP500 at a higher volume than what they would with the Partybox 110, that's going to cause them to drain their battery much faster. And in general, battery life on these speakers really varies depending on how you use them. If you use them at a higher volume, that's going to drain your battery. If you use them with the light feature turned on, that's going to drain your battery. And if you use them with the bass feature turned on, that's also going to drain your battery. Especially with the Partybox, since you've got 3 different bass modes to choose from. But then there's the Soundboks Go, which is just on a whole other level. The Soundboks Go has an advertised battery life of 40 hours, and that's with the speaker playing at 50% volume and while it's using its power EQ. And for context, the Go playing at 50% volume is like having the Partybox 110 playing at 75% volume. And at max volume, the Go is good for 10 hours of playback time. And max volume on the Go is just begging to get a visit from the cops. However, if you were to use the speaker while in its bass plus EQ, which is my preferred EQ because you're going to get more out of it, it's going to get louder and you're going to get more bass. However, you are going to have to sacrifice some battery life because at max volume is only good for up to 6 hours of playback time. Or if you want to extend your battery life, then you can always use the indoors EQ. But with the indoors EQ, the speaker just isn't going to get as loud and is going to reduce its bass. But at max volume, it's good for up to 14 hours of playback time. Overall, the battery life on the Soundboks Go just doesn't compare to these other 2 speakers. The Soundboks Go is just on a whole other level. And the really cool thing about the Soundboks Go is that you can easily swap out the battery. So if you have multiple batteries, you can always keep the party going if you're off-grid, and this is also going to extend the life of your investment. Because if your battery were to die on you, like mine did on my Soundboks 3 after 3 years, I can just easily get a new battery. So even though I really love the battery life on the Go and I really love the easy to swap out battery on it, something that I really don't like about the Soundboks Go is just its port setup. The Soundboks Go only has an audio jack. Now, yeah, you can always use a wired connection with it, but this port setup is really lacking, especially when compared to these other 2 speakers. Whereas with these other 2 speakers, they both have 2 1/4-inch inputs, so if you want, you can plug in a pair of microphones. They both have USB-A ports, so you can plug in a USB stick and play music off of them. Or if you really must, you can always charge your own devices with them. And with the Partybox 110, it has an audio out jack. So you can always daisy chain any other speaker to it and have them play in sync. So yeah, the port setup on the Soundboks Go is really disappointing, especially when compared to these other 2 speakers. And it's also very disappointing when compared to the Soundboks 3, which has a very impressive port panel. And when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity, even though the Soundboks Go is using Bluetooth 5.0, it can only be connected to one device at a time and is still only using SBC. However, latency is not an issue with this speaker, so if you are going to watch a video with it, your audio is going to be in sync. Whereas with these other two speakers, both of these speakers are using Bluetooth 5.1. But more importantly, both of these speakers can be connected to two devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJ and they both have zero latency across the board. However, with the Partybox 110, it's using both SBC and AAC, but the XP500 has support for both SBC and AAC and Sony's own LDAC. And before we move on to sound and speaker setup, I do want to point out one pet peeve that I do have about the Soundboks Go. Now, with this dial, you can adjust the local volume of the speaker, but you can't play or pause your music and you can't skip through your music directly from the speaker itself. You got to do all of that either through your phone or whatever media source you're using. Whereas with these other two speakers, you can control your media playback directly from the control panels up top. That's it. I just wanted to point out this small pet peeve. But with all of that out of the way, let's talk about sound. Now, when it comes to speaker setups, the Go has a single frontward firing 10-inch woofer and a single frontward firing tweeter horn. But the really important thing to keep in mind here is that the Go has frontward firing exhaust ports. And this is a big deal because you can't amplify the bass on the speaker by placing it up against the wall like you can with a lot of other box speakers out there. Whereas with these other two speakers, they have dual frontward firing woofers, dual frontward firing tweeters, and exhaust ports that shoot up the back. So you can increase their bass by simply placing them up against the wall. But another very important thing to keep in mind here is that with these two speakers, they have a left channel and a right channel, whereas the Go is a mono speaker. But with all that being said, we're going to jump into the sound test. Now, both the Go and 110 are playing at the same loudness, whereas the XP500 is just trying to keep up and playing at max volume. The Go is playing while in its power EQ, the 110 is playing with its bass set to deep, and the XP500 is playing with mega bass turned on. So first we have to talk about max volume performance on these speakers, and I think we should start off with the XP500. Now, when running off of its internal battery, the XP500 is a very quiet speaker relative to its size. The speaker really leaves you wanting more when it's playing at max volume off of its internal battery. Whereas the 110 gets decently loud when it's running off of its internal battery, and then there's the Go, which is just a little monster. It gets significantly louder than these other two speakers. However, with both the 110 and XP500, if you were to use them while they're plugged in, you are going to get a performance bump out of them. They're going to get louder and they're going to have more bass. When the XP500 is plugged in, that's when the speaker performs as you would expect. Now, you're also going to get a performance bump out of the 110 while it's plugged in, but it's not as dramatic as the XP500, and that's perfectly fine. And then there's the Go. Now, Soundboks says that you should not use the speaker past 50% volume if you have it plugged in and charging the battery. But for science, I did it and there's no performance boost here. And while we're here, I also want to let you know that you shouldn't use the Go while it's plugged in without a battery. I tried doing this and the Go started screeching, literally. But with all that being said, max volume performance on the XP500 is really disappointing when running off of its internal battery. But if you have it plugged in, that's when the speaker starts to perform as you would expect. The 110 gets decently loud off of its internal battery, but you can always get a little more out of it while it's plugged in. And finally, there's the Go. This thing gets significantly louder than these other two speakers, and using it at max volume will result in angry neighbors and a visit from the cops. And the Go manages to get super loud while off of its internal battery. Now, you can use the speaker while it's plugged in and while it's charging its battery, but you shouldn't raise the local volume past 50%. Now, with max volume out of the way, we can talk about actual sound quality. Now, the Soundboks Go is a very hard speaker to use while indoors. The Go really likes to use its tweeter for both the highs and a good amount of the mids. So, at the lower volumes that you would want to use the speaker while indoors, it can sound rather bright and flat. Now, you can go in and make your own EQ setting, and I went in and raised the bass and lowered the treble on the Go so that it wouldn't sound bright at lower volumes. But even still, it can sound a little flat and narrow at those lower volumes, and there just isn't enough bass. Whereas with these other two speakers, they have a good amount of physicality in their bass even at those lower volumes. And unlike the Go, which does like to lean towards a brighter sound signature, both the 110 and XP500 sound much more balanced by comparison. However, if you plan on using your speaker outdoors, this is where the Go really gets to shine. At higher volumes, this is where the speaker gets to stretch its legs and you finally get to feel all of the chest-thumping bass the Go can put out. And at these higher volumes, the Go continues to sound clearer with strong vocals and instrumentals. But like I mentioned earlier, since the Go really likes to put its tweeter to work, it can sound a little on the brighter side. So with all that being said, I would only recommend that you get the Go if you plan on mostly using it while outdoors. And by mostly outdoors, I mean like 90% of the time. Because if you plan on using your speaker 50% of the time indoors and 50% of the time outdoors, and if you only plan on using your speaker at lower volumes when outdoors, then I really feel that you're better off just getting the Partybox 110, because you're still going to get a good amount of physicality in its bass at those lower volumes. However, with the 110, I do have to point out that you can't customize its EQ like you can with these other two speakers. Now, you have 3 different bass modes to choose from, but you can't adjust the mids and highs to your liking on the speaker like you can with these other two speakers. Now, just so that there isn't any confusion, you can adjust the bass and treble on this speaker, but these adjustments only apply to any microphone you have connected to this speaker, not your music. But finally, let's talk about pairing these speakers up with other speakers. Now, the XP500 is the most accommodating speaker here. You can either pair it up to another XP500 or to a larger XP700, or you can also pair it up to some of Sony's more portable speakers, like either an XG500, an XB43, XB33, or XB23, and you can pair up to 100 speakers together. Now, even though Sony's speaker pairing protocol is the most accommodating here, it's not my favorite to use. Sometimes it can be a little hard to pair all of your speakers together, and sometimes you will hear some skipping in your music. But it works when it does. But then there's the Partybox 110, which is a lot more restrictive by comparison. With the Partybox 110, you can only wirelessly pair it up to one other 110, a Partybox 310, a 710, or to a Partybox Encore. And you can only have up to 2 speakers wirelessly connected to one another, which personally I feel is not enough. And I also think it's very important that I point out that you cannot pair any of JBL's more portable Party Boost speakers to any of their Partybox speakers. However, JBL speaker pairing protocol is a lot easier to use, and it's a lot more stable than Sony's speaker pairing protocol. And the unique thing that the Partybox 110 does have going for it is that it does have that audio out jack. So if you want, you can always daisy chain any other speaker to it and have them play in sync. So at least there's that. And then there's Soundboks' speaker pairing protocol, which works very well. You can pair a Soundboks Go either up to another Soundboks Go or to a Soundboks 3, and you can have a total of 5 speakers paired together, which I personally think is plenty. And the cool thing about Soundboks' speaker pairing protocol is that you can assign whatever channel you want to any of your speakers. So you don't need to have 2 of the same speakers to get left and right stereo sound going like you do with these other 2 brands. And in general, Soundboks' speaker pairing protocol is very good. It's very easy to use. You can do everything from the app. You have a lot of customization options. You can mix and match speakers, and I haven't had any connectivity issues. So with all that being said, even though the Soundboks Go does have its shortcomings, like a very disappointing port setup, and this isn't the best speaker for indoor use, because at lower volumes it does sound bright and flat, the Soundboks Go is still an amazing road warrior that isn't meant to be used while indoors or at lower volumes. The Soundboks Go is designed to be in the middle of the action and off-grid. Thanks to its super durable construction, the Go can easily take a beating, and thanks to its 99.84 watt-hour battery, it's gonna have no problem keeping up with you on a single charge. And if you're going to be off-grid for a while, or if you demand lots of battery life, then you can always swap out the battery and keep the party going. But more importantly, this thing gets loud. It gets dangerously loud. But if you're looking for something much more tamed, something that you'll be using half while at home and the other half while outdoors, the Partybox 110 is still a solid option, and it's easily one of my favorite speakers to recommend. At lower volumes, you're going to get the physicality in your bass that you crave, and at max volume, the 110 gets more than loud enough. However, if you do plan on taking the 110 with you on the go, you're gonna have to baby it a little bit. Yes, it is durable, but it can still get banged up pretty bad, and then there's its battery life. Don't expect the 110 to keep up with you like the Soundboks Go can. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something if I'm really proud of it.